Okay, so you guys are a chatty bunch, I can see, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and we're definitely going to turn it over to you for those, so please be thinking about those now. But beforehand, I wanted to just start the conversation up here. So really interesting talks. Thank you so much for each of those really different perspectives, but there were also a lot of common threads. So one that I was really excited to hear was this emphasis around kind of training that individual on things outside of what we typically think about in education, things like character. So just to start us off, how do you foresee kind of overcoming different barriers to kind of those non-traditional topics in education, or what makes you optimistic that we're moving toward a future where people are going to actually support those type of education efforts? Whoever wants to start.
I can start if you like, yeah. It's true that it's incredibly disruptive, certainly the design thinking way of educating. However, I get a sense that as society has changed anyway, the educational system is lagging slightly, and I get a sense that students almost know what they want. And it actually comes from the student body to actually push. It's kind of a bottom-up approach.
Great.
I have a different answer, complementary to that one, which is that I think students that are taught in these new ways will be more effective in the world. And they'll know it, their employers will know it, and the world will recognize, where did this graduate come from? They're amazing. I want more people like that. What kind of curriculum did that person study? And so that's just a free market thing that will lift it up. I think it'll happen automatically.
Okay, wonderful. And on this next one, I want to start with you, Anna, but then we can also open it up to the group. So when we talk about these innovations around education, when we talk about something like using AI models to make education really individualized, say someone here hears this, and they are like, I want in, I want to do this, I want to innovate in this way that you just talked about. Where do you encourage somebody to get started? How do they dip their toe into these waters?
In terms of getting in,
if they're interested in actually working in this space, innovating in this space, doing something like what you do,
come work with us. That would be the simple answer. Yeah, other than that, I think what we really emphasize at Sana Labs is to build a cross-functional team. So with that said, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs to be a machine learning engineer or a data scientist or a brilliant mathematician to tap into this. So it's a lot about behavioral sciences and my favorite word, pedagogy. So there's different, learning is super complex. So as long as you're very passionate about learning and personalized learning at scale, as we are focusing on, I see different types of applications. So yeah, I think the easy answer would be reach out to us. And other than that, I think you should probably start thinking about how can you combine all the online data that's out there with the latest breakthroughs within deep neural networks. Much of the approach we are taking, like what's the possibilities within that and what can you accomplish?
Okay, great. And for you, Grant, kind of this design thinking space. I've heard people say, oh, it's just for creatives. It's not for me.
No, it's
what would you say to them?
It's definitely not, actually. It really is for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but we could kind of say that everybody's born creative. And alas, the nature of education, and I don't just mean formal education, I do mean social education, it actually teaches us how to think and behave. And over time, if you look, I have children. I have two small boys, and if you look at their ability to express and see the world and be creative, we're all born like that. And by going through the nature of education, we're told how to think, and we're also in a social environment. We're all told how to think, and it's true that in getting. Certainly I didn't go into very detailed techniques, but when I start the conversation at the creative part of the design process, I'm extremely provocative at a psychological level. And I actually get everybody on chairs, and I've literally had executives doing this, making the most authentic animal noise, okay? And we go around the room twice. And it's very, very interesting because it's about the fear of being judged. Okay, and the fear of being judged means you suppress your self-expression, you suppress the way that you're thinking, and you don't give out into the space. And the fact that you go around twice is really quite nice, because some people do it, some people don't. But the people that don't do it see the people that are doing it, and it's a little bit of a release, okay? I'm going off on a tangent, but anyway.
No, that's important. Wonderful. And do you have thoughts to add to that as well? Specifically in the area, and actually both of you can speak to this, around empathy. So if we're talking about kind of teaching people to solve problems, obviously training empathy is a big part of that. How do you see us training empathy? What are the challenges there? What are the opportunities? And anyone can jump in on that if you'd like.
Well, I have a strange reaction to that. Well, first of all, there was a great essay, I'm forgetting the author, it was just against empathy.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes. I've linked, right.
Right,
Does anybody know that offhand?
Yeah, so
awesome.
the gist of you can look it up, but the gist of the article is that empathy is about actually personally experiencing the feeling of another being, and there are many cases in which you can be just as helpful to the other person or being, or maybe even more so if you're not also caught up in that emotion, and you can sort of objectively, you wouldn't want your surgeon thinking, oh my God, this is cutting into the, no, you want them, object. So anyway, I have a slightly odd answer to this, which is that it's something I meant to mention in my talk, which is that transferring a skill from one domain in which it's taught to another domain is tremendously hard. The way that you solve that is by giving students opportunities to practice a skill in many different contexts. You can't just teach empathy in a psychology class and then expect that they'll understand it when they become an economist. They won't. We all know people who are domain-specific masters and domain general fools. This is because transfer is hard. So the short answer to your question is whatever your technique is for teaching empathy or the behavior that you want to elicit with empathy, you have to teach it in a variety of contexts.
Could I add to that?
Absolutely.
Well, I actually find, totally in this conversation, and this idea of having too much empathy, I take that as the emotional intelligence to be able to read somebody else's emotions and not get caught up yourself. So you're fully aware. It's not about cutting off the subjectivity, but it's about knowing the nature of reality there and the nature of reality within yourself. And the idea about developing this and developing empathy, I find it's a reaction in the moment that you're confronted by what somebody who's conducting human-centered research, what they have in front of them, and then you as a facilitator and a professor are using that space to poke, in fact not poke, to bring forth and to question how they're feeling and why they're feeling like that. And this is one of the things that makes it very, very complicated to codify and put online, for instance, because it's very much developed in that moment of the research, in that moment of the creativity.
Okay. So when we're solving, though, for populations, for people, let's say that, I'm really interested in education in parts of the world that lack basic literacy. How do you encourage people to start to think about that? Or do you think that's even the wrong question? Or should that not be somebody outside of that context? Or what are your thoughts around actually solving these global grand challenges that maybe don't touch us as personally?
I mean, Grant's approach, so you have to go to the places where the people that you're trying to affect are affected. I mean, if you're not actually on the ground doing user research, you're lost from the first step. So this distance from 1,000 miles, empathy for people in rural villages, if I'm not going there and finding out what their actual problem is, what do they actually need? For example, if I think I should teach coding, which is a virtuous skill for many people, but I think that's going to be a universal solution, as was discussed in an earlier panel, for everyone, I'm unhinged. I need to go find out what they actually need.
Yeah, I agree.
It's one of the complexities of educating like this.
Right.
When we talk about the disruption, and an academic institution has, rooms with seats, and you can't do it. You literally cannot do it unless you go into the field. You cannot do human-centered research via Google.
Yeah.
And it's something that you're always up against, to be honest.
But and we also seen, I mean, in those areas, most likely they don't have internet access as well. And what we have provided in some cases is that you could actually download your curated, personalized deck of assignments that you should do that are based on how you learn, but you can't really do it in real time. So there's technical aspects, there's aspects of just maybe the kids are too, hungry to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be.
A lot of barriers there.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so I do want to make sure you all have a chance to ask your questions. So who's first? Who'd like to kick us off with audience questions? Yes, can we get a mic to this gentleman here?
Thank you. I'd like to ask Anna about her system.
Yeah.
We all know that learners are both thinking and feeling beings. And what might be the next best activity from a thinking point of view may not be the next best activity from a feeling point of view. I'm wondering how her recommender system for choosing the next best bit of education to personalize it takes account of the human as a feeling being as well as a thinking being.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, first of all. As we and our models can pick up more nuances of each and every single person, I think we can get better at that. But at this stage, it's about, is it early in the morning, then perhaps Todd is very tired, and we need to take that into concern when he's learning. And there's aspects as time, what's the pace in between answers and things like that. So it's pretty rudimental at this point, I would say. And I think it's a super interesting aspect. So I'm myself wondering how far can we push it in terms of the feelings and in terms of not being an efficient tool to cater to the whole individual. So I think at this point you need definitely, and probably as far as in my lifetime will need the human interaction as well in terms of getting the full learning experience. So we can't really deliver that at this time with our solution, I would say. But time will tell.
Who's next? Up here in the front. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, today it's very difficult to introduce all these concepts in a curriculum, in how the assessment is done and also how the evaluation is done. So what would you propose to softly introduce this into normal schools? But it's about, you all can answer if you...
So introducing into normal schools.
Yeah, because it's all about, as you're talking about personalized learning, assessment at the same time. Also, it's about creativity and critical thinking and choosing making decisions in each step of learning process. So some of them, they're not able, some of the students, to do this, depending on their also emotional development and so on and so on. So it's a complex situation. What do you see?
Instructors at most schools, at least in the United States, have a lot of freedom over what happens in their classroom. And I think this can be a problem. It was a problem I raised in my talk, but it can also be an opportunity. They can be little entrepreneurial ventures in each to him or herself. And there are plenty of people who are passionate about learning, even if they're not rewarded for it at their school. There are centers for teaching and learning at many places that have instructional designers who can help you design these things. I know firsthand teachers who simply are interested in active learning. They've read about it. They're interested in generalizable skills development. And they might just dip a toe in with a unit in a semester-long class that uses hands-on activities, does design challenges rather than textbook learning. There's this huge suite of different things that they might explore. I most people won't have the luxury we had at Minerva, which is to create an entire university with no commitments to anything that, so that took us 5 years to do that, 50 classes, but you don't have to buy the entire farm that way. You could just have a day.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, but what we see also today is that if you just look into the education material, still most teachers buy the book and the digital version as well. So I think it's in a phase of transition where what we see in almost every school and once you're out there is that there would be very helpful if there would be functions of somebody helping out. Okay, how do we use these digital tools in the best way and what's possible and how can we try them on a maybe a smaller scale? Because I think there's an immense transition taking place and it's hard for every single teacher to bring it into the classroom in a way that makes sense.
We have time for one more question. Have one more? All right, so we're going to do a lightning round. Future education, obviously an important thing. Obviously, we're expecting a lot of change, and you talked about a few different components of that today. What is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity around the future of education from each of your perspectives? We can start with you, Josh.
Biggest challenge is getting people to have an appetite for even teaching values and character and these non-sort of content-based skills. I think it's a bit of a tough sell to some crowds. Biggest opportunity is the science of learning, using cognitive science, using data science to actually figure out what works for students. Most education has been built around what's convenient for teachers. That is completely the wrong way of doing it.
Wonderful.
Okay, for me, the biggest challenge would be a cultural one, actually, because if the culture doesn't fit, design thinking tends not to fit. There is an argument the door swings both ways. You can actually start and implement culture change through design thinking programs. Perhaps vision is another challenge, because it's, as you say, it's quite a high sell. Okay, it's not just knowledge, it's something else. But as I think I stated a little bit, the opportunity is going to be automatic. I feel that society will push for this new kind of education, and I do feel students will also push for this new kind of education. And even if they don't, there is rumblings of business schools getting in quite a lot of difficulty, to be honest, about the way that they have their business model in selling education, and a lot of unhappy students about the quality of that education.
All right, Anna, you're wrapping us up.
My strong belief is that the opportunity and the challenge is basically the same thing. I think the challenge is that we all, as humans, have a built-in resistance against learning. But what unlocks it and what really matters is engagement. So when I'm feeling really, really engaged, I feel like learning. And learning becomes easy, and learning becomes fun, and I can reach completely new heights. So in my perspective, I think the challenge is to really lower that barrier of resistance by figuring out really smart ways where I think, and I see AI and machine learning is a true opportunity in terms of creating and making every single individual keeping them optimally engaged. So really unlocking that urge to learn by feeling that engagement.
Wonderful. Well, can we give a hand to all of our panelists, Josh, Grant, Anna? Thank you so much.